This is not looking good. Sony has already stopped production of the PSVR2 because they are struggling to clear out inventory. This system just came out February of last year, so it's just over a year old, and they're already cutting back on production and not making any more PSVR2s. It's not necessarily discontinued, but it's definitely headed towards that direction than it is making Sony any money and being successful, because it clearly is not. It is not even close. And you would think I'd be taking a victory lap on this, because I've made a couple of videos. I think I made a video right before the PlayStation VR2 came out, or maybe like right after, talking about how VR has no future in gaming and how it is not going to be successful, it never will, and all this stuff. And the common thing that I got in the comment section was, what about the PSVR2? It's going to change VR gaming forever. It's going to be the best thing to ever happen, and it's going to make VR mainstream. Well, here we are, and that clearly is not happening. And it's just more evidence that VR is nothing more than a niche. It's this very obscure thing that people talk about a lot, but don't actually spend money on or actually play. But if we're going to have an honest conversation here, Sony also is at fault as well for the PSVR2 failing. I think the main reason why is because, look, the PSVR1, the first one that was part of the PS4, that was the best-selling VR headset of all time. Despite you having to own a PS4, it was a $400 add-on or a $300 add-on for the PS4. So you have to spend a lot of money just to get into it. Then, of course, the Oculus Quest came out, and now it's called the Meta Quest, and that is now the most successful VR headset of all time. But for a while, it was actually the PlayStation VR. They owned the VR market, and it wasn't even close. So you would think with the PSVR2, they're going to build off of the momentum they gained from the first one, but one big problem with the VR2 is that it has zero backwards compatibility with the original headset. And now people may be saying, oh, well, that's because it's just so much more advanced and you can't really have backwards compatibility. Whatever the reason is, the fact of the matter is it doesn't have backwards compatibility. That's going to be a huge hindrance to the success and growth of the PlayStation VR platform, because you have people that spend all this money on these games, and then being told that they can't play those games on the new headset is going to automatically be like a non-starter for a lot of people. And it would be for me as well if I was someone who actually owned a PSVR headset and wanted to upgrade to PSVR 2. It's just like, no. Like, I think if they found a way to have that full backwards compatibility plus performance enhancements for those games, because a lot of them run at like 30 FPS, very low resolution, that is not very good for VR. Like, it actually is more likely to make you sick and uncomfortable playing a game at such low performance that the PSVR 1 had. To have all those games upgraded automatically would have been a huge thing for that console or headset, whatever, but they didn't have that. So I think that's the main thing. The price also doesn't help, because you had to already have a PlayStation 5, which was $500. This is more than the console itself. You had to pay $550 for the PSVR 2 on top of the $500 PS5. Even if you got the digital $400 PS5, it's still close to $1,000 just to get started, you know, so it's not ideal, definitely not ideal, as opposed to the Meta Quest, where it's like $300, I think, for the base model, right? You don't need any other stuff. You don't need a PC, you don't need a PlayStation, nothing, and that's why the Quest is doing as well as it is. Not to mention the Quest 3 has those things that the PSVR 2 does not have. It has full backwards compatibility for the Quest 2. All Quest 2 games are playable on Quest 3, and it has a performance-enhancing mode where you can increase the refresh rate and resolution for your games. And also, the PSVR 2 suffers from the same problem that most VR headsets have, where the vast majority of the game library is pretty much glorified tech demos. Like, you play it for a couple hours and you're already pretty much done with it, and there's nothing more that you can gain out of playing it. Like, you like, it's so shallow, and it shows how promising the VR technology could be, but they're not full-fledged games that you really want to pay $50, $60 for, because that's what they're charging for them, and they're charging more than the console itself to play those games. And also, the PSVR 2 has such a low library of games, so it's like a catch-22, right? because there are very few games that anyone would actually want to play on the PSVR2. On the other hand, Sony sees the low sales, and they see how disappointing the sales are, therefore they're scaling back on production, which I guess is fair because they have all that inventory that they need to clear out. So it's a cost-cutting measure and it makes sense. But, it's also like, how do you expect this thing to succeed, and how can you be disappointed in sales when you don't actually have anything meaningful to bring people into this platform? You just don't. It's like the PlayStation Vita. PlayStation Vita had jack shit when it came to games. Unless you're a weeaboo, they had plenty of Japanese role-playing. Other than that, that library was dry as fuck. They gave up on it after a year, and they had Surprise Pikachu face when it didn't even come close to selling as well as the PSP did. The PSP had fucking games. So it's really no surprise that the PSVR2 is not doing well, because there's no reason for it to be successful at this current point. Like, they need to step up that game library and actually give people a reason to invest in that platform. Because right now, there's not much going for it. Can Sony turn it around before it's too late? Maybe, but I wouldn't hold my breath, because they tend to not really care if, something that's not their main console, if that fails, they usually just brush it aside and forget about it, like the PS Vita, and will probably happen with the VR2. They saved the PS3 back in the day, but that's because they literally had no other choice. They would not survive if they didn't. With this, it's like, okay, VR is kind of an experiment, we could just get rid of it and move on. And I think that might be what they're going to do.